Round number 4 of the Chennai Grandmasters tournament. Arjun Erigaisi wins it, and in doing so, he is not only leading the tournament with 3.5 out of 4, but he is also inching very close to Magnus Carlsen's world number 1 spot. Arjun is playing with the black pieces against a very strong Iranian grandmaster, Amin Tabatabaei. There is a very nice psychological trick that Arjun uses in the game that we'll soon see. And at the same time, there is a very interesting opening strategy too. So we'll see what happens. We have e4, e5 on the board, and we reach the Italian opening. And in this position, white decides to short castle. Now Arjun also has the idea or the option to short castle here and play a very nice and quiet game. But instead, Arjun decides to not castle. And the point of this is, let me just clear out all the minor pieces. So the point of it I can show you clearly. The point of Arjun deciding not to castle is so that he can play h6, g5, push these pawns forward and just destroy this whole enemy pawn cover. Okay, whereas if he would have castled, he could not have pushed the pawns because that would also weaken his king. So we'll go back to the game. Yeah. So that's why here after short castle, Arjun first plays d6, and in a few moves he begins his attack against this white king with h6, g5. So we have g5. Now we have bishop e3 by white. White of course cannot sit quietly. He also has to take some proactive decisions. Bishop e3, exchanging this bishop first. And now the pawn goes forward, attacks the knight. The knight jumps back to e1. The other pawn goes forward and white pushes the pawn to d4. Now this move highlights a very important concept, and that is, if your opponent is attacking you on the flank, you want to break open the center. Okay, that's what white is trying to do with d4. His king is being attacked, or is soon gonna come under an attack, so white is preparing to open up the center. Goes d4 here. Now there comes the move h4. Okay, the pawns are just gonna keep marching forward. Bishop e2, white brings one more defender, and now Arjun decides, okay, I can go g3 at some point, but first let me get my queen in a good spot so that if there is any file opening, I also have my queen active and participating in the game. So he first plays the move queen e7. And the point is, this queen does come to h6, but at the same time, white also manages to get his knight to f1 to bring more defenders near the king. Now Arjun decides, okay, it's time to open up the king side here. My king, rook and queen are in the right space, so he plays g3. We have a few captures here. Remember, white cannot capture with the knight because you would lose this rook. You don't want to blunder the rook like that. He also cannot capture with the rook because he would lose this pawn. So white of course sees this and he plays the move h3. He keeps everything closed, and as long as everything is closed, the king remains protected. What will you play if you're black? Arjun decides it's time to get this knight into the game, so that, it can also contribute to attacking the king. So he goes first knight d7. White meanwhile tries to create his own counterplay on the queen side. The knight goes to f8. You have captures, and white plays this nice move queen c1. White is saying, if at any point I feel this attack is getting too much for me, I want to have the option to exchange of the queens. Arjun decides it's time to go in for the kill. He goes bishop h3. White captures gh3. And it may look that next move black is going to play queen h3, and next there is a checkmate on h1, and this white king is just finished. But no, queen h3 is a mistake here because it allows white to play bishop f3. And even though this king looks very exposed, it's completely safe here thanks to all the bodyguards that it has around him. So queen into h3 would be a mistake. But of course Arjun sees it. That's why he's 2800. So he goes knight g6, the best move in the position. And the point is, if you capture rook into g3, which is what happens in the game, this knight goes to f4. It stops the trade of queens. At the same time, this knight now is also participating in the attack. So white plays, okay, queen e3. Arjun is like, knight h3 check. I'm going to open up this king, and now I have my knight here too. White is like, okay, I have to cut my losses because if my king gets too exposed, there could be some mating ideas here. So he first decides to chop off this knight. And white is saying, okay, I'm fine with losing an exchange, but I've also captured your piece earlier. So we get this very interesting imbalance where black has a rook, whereas white has a knight and a bishop. A very interesting imbalance, a very interesting fight between these two minor pieces and the rook. Okay, now white plays bishop f3. White is like, okay, I need to defend this pawn. But this allows Arjun to get his rook on the open file. White plays rook b1. The idea of it will be clear to you in a couple of moves. The rook jumps to c3, attacks the bishop. Who's going to defend the bishop? The knight says, I will. So the knight jumps to d2. King moves forward. White plays this move, a5. Very nice move. White wants to play b5, but if he goes b5 here, there is a5, closing up this queen side, not allowing the rook to come into the game. Okay, so there would be no counterplay. That's why white has to play a5 first. How can I get this knight into the game? Because this knight is just limited by the bishop and the pawns. So Arjun first plays this move, knight d7. And the idea of this move is to get this knight to a better square, like he does with the move knight g6. Now this knight can come here, and it can participate on any action that will happen on this side of the board. Okay, now we have takes here. The bishop drops back, attacks the rook, and the rook jumps to h6. Why h6? You'll soon understand why. This rook gives a check. This rook has managed to invade, and that was the whole point of playing rook b1 and rook b7 here, to create play on the queen side. The king jumps back to f8. The rook goes to b6, attacking this pawn, and now the knight goes to f4. And the whole point of rook h6 was so that once the knight moves, there was this rook to guard this d6 pawn. So white is like, okay, I'm going to take the pawn, thank you very much. And Arjun plays a very nice move here. He puts the rook behind the passed pawn. Okay, this is a very useful thing to do when you are, let's say, defending against an enemy passed pawn. Put the rook behind the passed pawn. This way your rook is always eyeing this pawn's advance. The rook gives a check. The king jumps to g7 where it's safer. White pushes a6. White wants counterplay, so he wants this pawn to be as close as possible to the queening square. Arjun now plays rook a2, pins this knight. So white is like, okay, I have to defend it, and I go knight f3. Now Arjun plays the move f5. The point is, if you take e into f5, there is a move like e4. And suddenly if you move the knight, you're going to lose this d2 knight. So it would be a very tricky situation, even though the engine can defend from here. From a practical perspective, this is very, very hard. So what white decides to do is, first he decides to give this check. After rook a7 check, Arjun could have easily gone king f6. But instead, he first decides to repeat and then go king f6. And this creates a very interesting dynamic that I like to call the aggressor and the defender. By repeating the moves, black knows that white is playing for a draw. So now when he's rejected the draw offer with a move like king f6, now he's saying to black, okay, I am the one who's going to press for a win. If you want a draw, you have to find it over the board. I am not going to agree to a draw. And often whenever this dynamic is created, the side who is defending, they often make a mistake. It doesn't mean that it happens all the time, but in many cases it does happen. And this is something that you can use if, let's say, you are pressing in an endgame where you have a slight edge. White does go wrong here. Amin plays the move bishop f1. Instead, he had to play rook d7, and the idea is a little crazy. You have to calculate this a bit, and that is, after check, you basically get this pawn to a7, and you just sacrifice your pieces here, and you have this pawn on a7 goes here. Now you can play this check, and you can make a queen. You win the rook back, and this is a drawing position. This was an idea, not easy to calculate in a real game, or maybe you can calculate it, but yeah, it's just not so easy in a practical game. So here Amin plays bishop f1, not the best move, and this allows Arjun to play f into e4. The bishop goes to c4, attacks the rook goes to c2, and now Amin plays rook d7. So his idea is correct. He somehow jumbled up the move order. He thought maybe he could go here e into f3, but this turns out to be a mistake because it allows white to play rook d6 check. The king goes here, and the point is you take, and this pawn goes to a7, and there is nobody to stop this pawn from queening. You can lose the knight, nobody cares about it. King f3. There's no way that this pawn can be stopped from queening since the square is controlled by the bishop, so the rook can't come here. But what maybe white missed here is the move rook h3. And now there is a threat to play rook into f3 check. So the white king comes to e3. If you give this check, now the king only goes to f5, and on the next move there is going to be one of the knight is going to fall. So that's why king e3 first by white. Arjun takes the pawn. Now there comes knight e4 check. The king goes forward, knight captures the pawn, and the king comes here. Very nice move. Whenever the king is 2 squares away from the knight just finds it very, very hard to give a check. Okay, so then like the knight has to waste a lot of moves before it can give a check to the king. Now the bishop drops back to f1, hoping to create some defense, but Arjun finds a very excellent finish here. Can you find it? Arjun plays the nice move rook e2. And the point is, this king is checkmated. And so white has to take the rook, and after f into bishop, this pawn is the one that's going to become a queen before this a pawn, and black wins the game. You can go here, there is this check here, and rook check, and black is completely winning. So that's why after the move rook e2 check in this position, white resigned, Arjun won a game, and he's getting very, very close to the world #1 spot. We may very well have a new world #1 soon. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed watching the video, do consider liking it and do consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you. Bye bye.